Get off my stage. I just want to... Did I stutter? Move!
Megan Holloway's lip curled. She looked Grace Carter up and down like something stuck to her shoe.
Look at you. Sweating through that cheap leotard like an ugly cow legs.
Grace gripped the bar, said nothing.
You know what?
Megan stepped closer.
You're clumsy as a cow. A big, stumbling cow!
Laughter cracked across the studio. A phone rang, red light blinking.
Get back to the cow shed you came from!
Megan hissed.
Before you embarrass yourself worse.
Grace's fingers tightened around her grandmother's worn ballet shoes, ribbons frayed to threads. That night, the video of the performance went viral. 2 million views. The whole world laughed at the clumsy cow, but when they reached the end, what that black girl did left everyone gaping in astonishment. Grace Carter had been dancing before she could spell her own name. The south side of Detroit wasn't known for ballet studios. It was known for boarded-up windows, corner stores with bulletproof glass, and the kind of silence that settled over streets after dark. Not the peaceful kind, the holding your breath kind. But inside a narrow garage on Maple Avenue, music played every single evening without fail. Eleanor Carter had converted that garage herself. 44 years ago, she'd been the most promising ballet dancer in the Midwest, a black woman in a world that wasn't built for her, spinning through auditions where judges marked her down before she took a single step. The old photographs told the story better than words. Eleanor, at 24, suspended mid-leap, her body a perfect arc against a dark curtain. Eleanor at 26, holding a bouquet after her first principal role. Eleanor at 28, crumpled on a stage floor, both hands clutching her right knee, the career she'd built note by note, collapsing in a single terrible crack. She never performed again. But she never stopped teaching. The garage had plywood laid over concrete, sanded smooth and sealed with 3 coats of polyurethane. The bar was copper plumbing pipe bolted into the wall studs. The mirror was a patchwork, 3 salvaged pieces glued to a sheet of particle board, a crack running through the center that split every reflection in 2. And in front of that cracked mirror, 5-year-old Grace had learned her first plie. By 7, she could hold an arabesque for 40 seconds. By 10, she was drilling fouettes while Eleanor counted from a folding chair, one hand resting on the cane she now needed to walk. By 14, Grace had watched every ballet performance on YouTube twice and every street dance battle 3 times. She didn't see 2 different worlds. She saw one language spoken in 2 dialects. Eleanor taught her the vocabulary of classical ballet, the precision, the discipline, the centuries of technique refined until every movement carried meaning. The streets taught her the rest. Late at night, after Eleanor had gone to bed, Grace would pull up videos on a cracked phone screen and teach herself popping, locking, floor work, power moves. She'd drill them in the garage with the lights off, feeling the rhythm through her feet, letting her body answer questions her mind hadn't asked yet. She never told her grandmother about the street dance. Not because Eleanor would disapprove, but because Grace wanted to surprise her someday. She was building something new, fusing 2 worlds that had never been asked to share a stage. She just didn't have a name for it yet. The poster appeared on a Tuesday. Grace spotted it taped to the window of a coffee shop on Jefferson Avenue, 4 blocks from home. Regional Dance Championship, hosted by Prestige Dance Academy. Grand prize, full scholarship to Juilliard, open to all dancers aged 18 to 25, any style, any background. The photograph on the poster showed the Academy's grand theater. Chandeliers, velvet seats, a stage so wide it looked like it could hold the ocean. Grace stood on the sidewalk and stared at it for a long time. A city bus rolled past behind her, kicking up grit that stung her ankles. She didn't move. That evening she told Eleanor. The old woman was sitting in her chair by the garage window, rubbing liniment into her knee the way she did every night. Slow circles, the smell of camphor filling the room. She listened without interrupting. When Grace finished, Eleanor looked at her. Really looked at her, the way only someone who has watched you grow from nothing can look, and said 5 words. Go show them what this garage made. Grace registered the next morning. Prestige Dance Academy sat on the north side of the city like a different country. Glass walls, polished marble floors, a reception hall with fresh flowers and framed photographs of former students who'd gone on to Juilliard, the Royal Ballet, American Ballet Theater. Everything gleamed. Everything whispered money and legacy and you don't belong here. Grace walked through the front doors in her cleanest jeans and a t-shirt she'd ironed twice. Her bag held her grandmother's old ballet shoes, a water bottle, and a granola bar she'd packed at 5 in the morning because she couldn't afford the cafe downstairs. The woman at the reception desk looked up. Her eyes traveled from Grace's sneakers to her hair to the bag hanging from her shoulder. A pause, just long enough to feel like a judgment. Can I help you? I'm here to register for the competition. Another pause, longer this time. The dance competition? Yes, ma'am. The woman's expression shifted into something Grace had seen 100 times. The careful, practiced politeness that covered surprise, or doubt, or both. The kind of smile that said, I'm not going to say what I'm thinking, but we both know what I'm thinking. Down the hall, room 114. Grace nodded and walked. The hallway stretched ahead, lined with studio doors, each one leaking music and the sound of shoes striking wood. Through one glass panel, she saw a dozen dancers in matching black leotards, every movement synchronized, every body long and lean and pale. None of them looked up. None of them needed to. She found room 114, filled out the form, paid the $50 entry fee, money Eleanor had pressed into her hand that morning, folded bills pulled from a coffee tin on the kitchen shelf. The same tin that held the electricity money and the grocery money and whatever was left after that, which was usually nothing. On her way out, Grace passed Studio A. The door was open. Inside, a girl with copper-red hair was rehearsing a solo. Technically flawless, each turn landing on the beat, each extension held at perfect height. Around her, 4 other dancers sat stretching, watching, talking in low voices. The red-haired girl caught Grace's reflection in the mirror. She stopped mid-turn. Can I help you? Same words as the receptionist, different tone entirely. This one had teeth. Just passing through, Grace said. The girl looked at Grace's bag, at her shoes, at her jeans. A smile spread across her face. Slow, deliberate, pitying. The custodial office is downstairs, she said. The 4 girls laughed, a small, sharp sound like glass cracking on tile. Grace didn't answer. She turned and walked down the hallway, past the gleaming floors and the framed photographs and the fresh flowers, back out into the sunlight, where the air didn't cost anything to breathe. In her bag, her grandmother's ballet shoes pressed against her hip, worn satin, ribbons soft as old skin. 44 years of silence stitched into every thread. She tightened the strap on her shoulder and kept walking. That was the first time Megan Holloway made Grace Carter feel small. It would not be the last. But it would be the last time Grace let it show. The open rehearsal was held on the Saturday morning, 9 days before the championship. All 26 competitors shared the main studio, a room 3 times the size of Eleanor's garage, with floor-to-ceiling mirrors, sprung hardwood, and a sound system that could rattle your teeth. The Academy had opened its doors to let contestants warm up, learn the stage layout, and practice their routines under competition lighting. Grace arrived early. She chose a spot in the far corner, near the emergency exit, and began stretching. She'd brought Eleanor's ballet shoes in her bag, but wore her own, a pair she'd bought second-hand from a thrift store on Michigan Avenue, the soles re-glued twice. She placed her bag against the wall, carefully, the way you'd set down something that mattered more than everything else in the room combined. The studio filled quickly. Dancers claimed their spaces the way animals mark territory. Bags dropped, water bottles placed, invisible lines drawn. Grace noticed the pattern immediately. The academy students clustered in the center, close to the mirrors, close to the speakers. Everyone else hugged the edges. Megan arrived last. She walked through the door like she owned the building, which, in a way, she did. Her father's name was on the brass plaque in the lobby. Her photograph hung in the Hall of Champions, 3 years running. She wore a jet black leotard that probably cost more than Grace's monthly groceries. Her copper hair pulled into a bun so tight it looked painted on. Her crew followed, 4 girls in matching academy leotards moving in formation like backup dancers who'd forgotten the show hadn't started yet. Megan took center floor. No one objected. No one even looked surprised. For 20 minutes, the rehearsal went smoothly. Dancers stretched, ran sequences, marked choreography. The music shifted between tracks, classical, contemporary, hip-hop, and the room hummed with controlled energy. Then Grace stood up. She moved to a small open patch near the bar and began running through her routine. She started with ballet, a slow adagio, arms lifting through first position to fifth, her body unfolding like a sentence being read aloud. She was testing the floor, feeling the spring in the wood, letting her muscles remember what they'd practiced 10,000 times in a garage with a cracked mirror. Megan noticed. At first it was just a glance, then a longer look. Then she stopped mid-releve and turned fully, watching Grace with the kind of attention a cat gives a bird that's wandered too close to the window. "Everybody?" Megan said. Not loud. She didn't need to be loud. The room was already trained to listen. "Everybody? Stop for a second. You need to see this." The music cut. 25 heads turned. Grace froze, one arm extended, her weight balanced on her left foot. No, keep going," Megan said, waving her hand. "Please, continue. I want everyone to see what we're competing against this year." Grace lowered her arm. She said nothing. "Come on." Megan took 3 steps closer. "Show us that thing you were doing, that little... What was that, a plie? Or were you just trying not to fall over?" Laughter, not from everyone, but enough. "Seriously, look at her," Megan said, turning to her crew. "Clumsy as a cow. A big, stumbling, clumsy cow trying to do ballet in a barn." The laughter spread. Sophie Bennett, tall, blonde, standing behind Megan's left shoulder, pulled out her phone. The camera was already recording. "Moo," someone whispered, and the group beside Megan cracked up. Grace stood perfectly still. Her jaw tightened. Her hands hung at her sides, fingers curled inward, nails pressing into her palms. She looked at Megan, not with anger, not with tears, but with something quieter and harder to break. She looked at her the way a wall looks at a fist. "Are you done?" Grace said. Megan blinked. She hadn't expected words. "Excuse me?" "I asked if you're done, because I need this space to practice." The room went silent. Not the comfortable silence of concentration, the electric silence that comes before something breaks. Megan stepped forward until she was close enough for Grace to smell her perfume, something expensive, floral, suffocating. "Let me make this really clear for you," Megan said, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried across the entire studio. "You don't belong here. You never did. And when you walk out on that stage in front of 2,000 people, every single one of them is going to see exactly what I see right now. A girl from the gutter, pretending." Grace held her gaze for 3 full seconds. Then she picked up her bag, slung it over her shoulder, and walked to the far wall. She sat down. She unlaced her shoes. She placed them in her bag next to Eleanor's pair, and she waited for the rehearsal to end. She didn't leave. That night, the clip hit the internet. Sophie had edited it, cut to make Grace look stiff and awkward, looped the stumble from her adagio, overlaid with a cow emoji and the caption, "When the janitor thinks she can dance." The hashtag was #ClumsyCow. By morning, it had 2 million views. The comments were a landfill. She should stick to mopping. Someone call animal control. Imagine showing up to Prestige looking like that. Memes multiplied. Grace's face photoshopped onto a cow, onto a mop, onto a dumpster. A TikTok remix set her stumble to a polka beat and got another 1 million views by noon. Grace sat on her bed and watched the numbers climb. Her phone buzzed every few seconds with notifications from accounts she didn't follow, people she'd never met, a world that had decided she was a joke before she'd even danced. She set the phone face down on the mattress and walked to the garage. Eleanor was already there, sitting in her chair, cane across her lap. She didn't ask what happened. She'd seen it. Someone from church had called, then a neighbor, then another neighbor. The whole block knew. Maybe they're right, Grace said. Her voice was flat, empty. Maybe I don't belong there. Eleanor didn't answer immediately. She pushed herself up from the chair, slow, careful, her right knee catching halfway, making her wince. She limped to the old wooden cabinet against the back wall, the one with the sticky drawer that nobody ever opened. She pulled it open now. Inside, wrapped in a faded silk cloth, was a pair of ballet shoes. Pale pink satin, darkened with age, the ribbons yellowed but still intact. Eleanor's shoes. The ones she'd worn in her final performance, the night her knee shattered and the music stopped forever. She held them out to Grace. "Open the left one," Eleanor said. "Look inside." Grace turned the shoe over. There, written on the inner sole in blue ink that had faded almost to nothing, were 8 words. "Dance like they'll never let you stop." "I wrote that the night before my last show," Eleanor said. She was standing without her cane now, both hands trembling, eyes bright. "I didn't know it would be my last. I thought I had 40 more years of stages. I had one more night." She reached out and closed Grace's fingers around the shoes. "They took my stage, baby. Don't you let them take yours." Grace looked at the shoes in her hands. Worn satin, faded ink. 44 years of silence and survival pressed into every stitch. She didn't cry. She put the shoes in her bag, zipped it shut, and said one word. "Tomorrow." The next morning, Grace Carter walked back into Prestige Dance Academy. She didn't speak. She didn't smile. She went straight to the rehearsal room, laced up her grandmother's shoes, and started again. From the very first step. Grace trained like someone who had already lost everything and had nothing left to protect. Every morning at 5, before the sun cracked the horizon, she was in the garage. Eleanor's ballet shoes on her feet. Eleanor's voice in her ear. The old woman sat in her folding chair with a stopwatch in one hand and her cane in the other, tapping the rhythm on the plywood floor. Tap, 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 like a heartbeat that refused to quit. "Straighten that back, you're leaning," Grace adjusted. "Again." She repeated the sequence. Port de bras to développé, développé to grand jeté. The same 12 bars of music, over and over, until the movements didn't belong to her brain anymore. They belonged to her bones. "Now the turn. Full fouetté. Give me 8. Grace spun. 1, 2, 3, 4. Clean. 5. Her heel slipped on the polyurethane. She caught herself, reset, started over. "Again," Eleanor said. It was the only word that mattered in that garage. After ballet, Grace waited for Eleanor to fall asleep, usually around 9, the liniment smell fading from the kitchen into the hallway, and then she went back. She pulled the garage door shut, turned the lights off, and plugged her earbuds in. In the dark, she became someone else. The ballet disappeared. The discipline stayed, but the rules fell away. She popped. She locked. She hit the floor and came back up like gravity was a suggestion. She drilled power spins until her shoulders ached and windmills until the ceiling tiles blurred into a single gray streak. Then she did something no one had ever done in that garage before. She put both together. A fouette that broke mid-rotation into a freeze, an arabesque that collapsed into a floor sweep, a classical port-de-bras that stuttered, then exploded into a pop-and-lock sequence so sharp it looked like her arms were arguing with each other. 2 languages, 1 sentence. The garage had never heard anything like it. Neither had Eleanor. It happened on a Thursday. Grace didn't hear the side door open. She was mid-routine, earbuds in, lights off, a street lamp throwing a gold rectangle through the window onto the floor. She was deep in it, eyes closed, spinning through a sequence that started as Tchaikovsky and ended as something that didn't have a name yet. The lights came on. Grace stumbled, ripped out her earbuds. Eleanor stood in the doorway, leaning on her cane, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. For a long, terrible second, Grace thought her grandmother was angry. "How long?" Eleanor said. "Since I was 14. 5 years. Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. 5 years you've been doing this in my garage and I didn't know. Grandma, Shut up and do it again. Grace blinked. The whole thing, from the top. Do it again. Grace did it again. This time with the lights on, with Eleanor watching from her chair, with the cracked mirror throwing back both their reflections. The old woman still as stone, the young woman moving like water, finding every crack in a dam. When Grace finished, Eleanor didn't speak for almost a minute. She just sat there, both hands on her cane, staring at the spot where Grace had ended her last spin. Then she said, "Come here. Sit down." Grace sat on the floor in front of the chair. Eleanor reached behind her and pulled a rolled-up paper from the shelf, old, yellowed, held together with a rubber band that snapped when she removed it. She unrolled it on the floor between them. Sheet music. Handwritten choreography notes in the margins. Diagrams of positions, transitions, floor patterns. "I wrote this 44 years ago," Eleanor said, "the summer before my last show. It was supposed to be my legacy piece, a solo that combined classical ballet with jazz and contemporary. No one had tried it before, not like this." She smoothed the creased edges with her palm. "I never got to perform it. My knee broke 3 days before opening night." Grace looked at the diagrams, the transitions, the way Eleanor had mapped the emotional arc of the piece, from restraint to release, from tradition to freedom, from silence to storm. "This is what you were building," Grace said. "This is what I never finished." Eleanor placed her hand on Grace's knee. "Now it's yours. Take what I wrote and add what you taught yourself in the dark. Make it whole." Grace studied the choreography every night for a week. She kept the bones of Eleanor's vision, the classical foundation, the emotional structure, the way each section built on the last like verses of a poem. But she rewrote the connective tissue. Where Eleanor had planned a traditional transition, Grace inserted a freeze. Where Eleanor had marked a slow cambray, Grace mapped a floor sweep that would bring her from standing to prone and back up in 3 counts. The piece became a conversation between 2 generations, grandmother and granddaughter, stage and street, what was stolen and what was reclaimed. Eleanor watched every rehearsal. She corrected the ballet. She stayed silent during the street dance, studying it the way a linguist studies a dialect she can feel but can't quite speak. Sometimes she nodded, sometimes she leaned forward in her chair. Once, during a transition where Grace spiraled from a fouette into a power spin, Eleanor whispered, "There, that's the one. That's the moment they'll remember." On the 5th day, someone else came looking. Sophie Bennett appeared at the garage at 7 in the evening, still in her academy leotard, hair damp from the shower. She'd walked 6 blocks from the bus stop. She stood at the side door looking through the window, and what she saw made her hand freeze on the handle. Grace was mid-routine. The music, a string arrangement Eleanor had chosen, layered with a beat Grace had found on SoundCloud, filled the small space. Grace moved through it like she was translating a secret into motion, every turn precise, every break explosive, every transition so seamless it looked like the two styles had always been one. Sophie opened the door. Grace stopped. Eleanor turned in her chair. The music played on for 3 bars before Grace hit pause. "I'm sorry," Sophie said. She was out of breath, though she hadn't been running. I wanted to say I'm sorry for the video, for standing there and laughing, for all of it." Grace studied her face, looked for the trick, found nothing but a girl who'd spent a week watching a clip that made her famous for the wrong reason. "Why now?" Grace asked. "Because I watched you through that window for 4 minutes, and I realized Megan lied to us. You're not clumsy. You're not even close." Sophie's voice cracked. "You're the best dancer I've ever seen." Eleanor tapped her cane twice on the floor, her version of agreement. Grace nodded. Not forgiveness, not yet, but acknowledgement. A door left unlocked. "You can stay and watch," Grace said, "but if that phone comes out, you leave." Sophie sat on the floor by the door and didn't move for 2 hours. What none of them knew was that Megan had already noticed Sophie's absence from evening practice, and Megan Holloway did not tolerate defection. The next morning, the rumors started. Whispers in the academy hallway. Grace Carter had stolen her choreography from a YouTube video. She was a fraud. She was cheating. Sophie Bennett, who they once called a friend, was feeding Grace insider information about the other competitors' routines. Megan spread the lies with surgical precision, planting a word here, a raised eyebrow there, until the entire academy hummed with suspicion. But in the garage on Maple Avenue, Eleanor tapped her cane, Grace hit her marks, and the cracked mirror held them both without judgment. Then, on a Tuesday evening, the cane slipped. Eleanor stood up to demonstrate a hand position, just a simple port-de-bras, a movement she'd done 100,000 times, and her right knee buckled. She went down hard, catching the edge of the chair, her cane clattering across the plywood floor. Grace was beside her in a second, arms around her grandmother's shoulders. "I'm fine," Eleanor said, but her face was white and her hands were shaking. "You're not fine. My knee gave up on me a long time ago, baby. That's old news." Eleanor gripped Grace's arm and pulled herself back into the chair. She took 3 slow breaths. Then she looked at Grace with the kind of clarity that only comes when the body is failing and the mind refuses to follow. "You dance for both of us now. You understand? Whatever happens on that stage, you're not just dancing for you. You're dancing for every girl who ever practiced in a garage and was told it didn't count." Grace held her grandmother's hand. The skin was thin and warm, the knuckles swollen from decades of gripping bars and canes and the edges of chairs. "I'll make them see," Grace said. "You already do," Eleanor answered. "You just haven't shown them yet." That night, a 20-second clip appeared online, not of Grace stumbling, but of Grace flying. Tyrell Brooks, her oldest friend, had filmed her through the garage window without asking. By morning, the clip had 100,000 views, and the comments were nothing like before. Tyrell's clip changed the conversation overnight. He hadn't planned it. Tyrell Brooks was 20 years old, a street dancer himself, and Grace's closest friend since 3rd grade. He'd been walking past the garage on his way home from a shift at the auto shop when he heard the music, something classical layered with a beat he didn't recognize. He stopped, looked through the window, saw Grace mid-spin, moving in a way that made the air in the garage look different, like she was bending light. He pulled out his phone, pressed record, and held it steady for 22 seconds. He posted it at 11 that night with no caption, just the clip. No hashtag, no explanation. By 6 in the morning, it had 100,000 views. By noon, 300,000. The comment section was a war zone. People who recognized the clumsy cowgirl fighting with people who couldn't believe this was the same person. This is fake. This is not the same girl. Bro, look at the garage. Same mirror, same floor. That's her. By the end of the day, a local news station picked it up, then a dance blog, then another. The headline wrote itself. The clumsy cow can fly. Megan Holloway watched the numbers climb from her bedroom on the north side of the city, and for the first time in her life, she felt something she didn't have a name for. It sat in her chest like a stone. It tasted like losing. She called her father. Richard Holloway had built Prestige Dance Academy from a single rented studio into the most prestigious dance institution in the Midwest. His name was on the building. His money funded the competition. His daughter had won it 3 years in a row. The idea that a girl from Southside, a girl who trained in a garage, could walk onto his stage and threaten that legacy was not something he was prepared to entertain. The letter arrived on a Wednesday morning, 6 days before the championship, hand-delivered to Eleanor's house by a courier in a pressed shirt. Grace opened it at the kitchen table while Eleanor watched from across the room. Dear Miss Carter, it read. After a review of competition protocols, the organizing committee has determined that your registration is in violation of Section 12.4 of the Regional Dance Championship Guidelines, which prohibits unauthorized media publication featuring competition participants during the preparation period. Your registration has been revoked, effective immediately. We wish you success in future endeavors. Grace read it twice. Then she set it on the table and pressed both palms flat against the wood, the way you do when you're trying to keep the room from spinning. What does it say? Eleanor asked. They kicked me out. The silence that followed was the heaviest thing in that kitchen. Heavier than the stove, heavier than the refrigerator Eleanor had bought secondhand in 1998, heavier than the 44 years of regret that lived in the old woman's bones. On what grounds? Unauthorized media. Tyrell's video. Eleanor's jaw tightened. She reached for her cane and stood up slowly, the way she did when she was angry. Because Eleanor Carter didn't get loud when she was furious, she got vertical. Get me the phone, she said. But the phone rang before Grace could hand it over. It was Sophie Bennett. Don't accept it, Sophie said, her voice rushed and breathless. Grace, listen to me. That rule, Section 12.4, it's never been enforced. Not once. Megan posted 15 rehearsal clips this month alone. Her father made them send that letter. I heard him on the phone with the committee chair last night. You heard him? I was in Studio B. His office shares a wall. He didn't know anyone was there. Sophie paused. Grace, I'll testify. I'll tell them exactly what I heard. Grace looked at Eleanor. The old woman was standing by the window, both hands on her cane, staring out at the street like she was watching something only she could see. Do it, Eleanor said without turning around. Let them hear. Tyrell moved next. The documentary clip he'd been building, footage of Grace training, Eleanor coaching, the garage with its plywood floor and cracked mirror. He cut a 3-minute version and posted it with a single line. They told her she was a clumsy cow. Then they tried to make sure no one would ever see the truth. He tagged every dance blog, every local news outlet, every journalist who'd covered the original viral clip. It detonated. Within hours, the story was everywhere. Black dancer barred from competition after rival's father intervenes. Prestige Academy accused of rigging championship. The hashtag #LetGraceDance trended nationally before dinner. Comments flooded the Academy's social media, hundreds, then thousands, demanding Grace's reinstatement. Former students came forward with their own stories of favoritism. A petition hit 50,000 signatures by midnight. Richard Holloway released a statement calling the allegations baseless and hurtful. It convinced no one. The Academy's board of directors called an emergency meeting. Ms. Vivian Cole demanded to chair it. Vivian Cole was 71 years old. She'd danced principal roles on Broadway for 18 years. choreographed for the American Ballet Theater, and served as head judge of the regional championship for the past decade. She had silver hair, a spine like rebar, and a reputation for fairness that made powerful people uncomfortable. When she spoke, rooms rearranged themselves to listen. She reviewed Grace's registration file. She reviewed Section 12.4. She reviewed Megan Holloway's social media accounts, all 15 rehearsal clips, plus the original Clumsy Cow video, which was itself unauthorized media of a competition participant posted during the preparation period. Then she reviewed the emails. Sophie had saved them. Screenshots of messages between Richard Holloway and the committee chair, a man named Gerald Parsons, who owed his seat on the board to a donation Richard had made 3 years earlier. The messages were short and damning. Handle the Carter situation. Make it clean. Use 12.4. No one reads the fine print. Vivian Cole placed the printouts on the conference table and looked at Richard Holloway across 12 feet of polished mahogany.
Mr. Holloway, she said, Section 12.4 has been violated by no fewer than 9 contestants this season, including your daughter. If you would like me to enforce it uniformly, I will. Every single one of them goes home, including Megan. Is that what you want? Richard opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. I thought not, Vivian said. Viv Grace Carter's registration is reinstated, effective now. And Gerald, she turned to the committee chair who had gone the color of wet cement, we'll be discussing your tenure on this board at a later date. The vote was unanimous, 7-0. Grace was back in. The news broke at 10 that evening. Grace was sitting in the garage when Sophie called. She answered, listened, said thank you, and hung up. She sat in Eleanor's chair, the folding one with the worn cushion, and pressed her grandmother's ballet shoes against her chest. Her phone buzzed, a text from Tyrell. You're in. Go show them. She didn't celebrate. She didn't cry. She laced up Eleanor's shoes and walked to the center of the garage floor. Tomorrow was the last rehearsal day. The championship was in 5 days. But that night, at 11, Eleanor's neighbor called. Eleanor had fallen in the bathroom. Her right knee, the same knee that had ended her career 44 years ago, had given out completely. She was on the floor, conscious but unable to stand, one hand gripping the edge of the bathtub. Grace drove to the hospital in Tyrell's borrowed car, running 2 red lights. She found Eleanor in the emergency room, propped up on a gurney, her right leg immobilized in a foam brace. The fluorescent lights made her look smaller than Grace had ever seen her. Don't you dare, Eleanor said when she saw Grace's face. Don't you dare think about not dancing. Grandma, you listen to me. Eleanor's voice was thin but hard, like a wire pulled taut. I spent 44 years in that garage because someone took my stage. You have a stage now. You walk onto it. You hear me? Grace took her grandmother's hand. The IV line ran across the back of it, taped down with white medical tape, a bruise already blooming underneath. You dance for every little girl in every garage who was told she wasn't enough, Eleanor said. You dance for me. And you dance for you. Grace pressed her forehead against Eleanor's knuckles. She stayed like that for a long time, feeling the pulse beneath the paper-thin skin, counting the beats the way Eleanor had taught her to count music. Steady, steady, steady. At midnight, she drove back to the garage, alone. The folding chair was empty. The stopwatch sat on the shelf. The cracked mirror reflected one person instead of 2. Grace placed Eleanor's ballet shoes on the plywood floor. She knelt and laced them slowly. Left foot, right foot, double knot, the way her grandmother had taught her when she was 5. She stood. She pressed play. The music filled the garage, and she danced the whole routine, start to finish, without stopping. No corrections from the chair, no cane tapping rhythm,
Just Grace and the floor and the ghost of every lesson that had ever lived in that room. When the last note faded, she stood in the center of the garage, breathing hard, and said one word to the empty chair. Ready? The Grand Theater at Prestige Dance Academy held 2,014 seats. On the night of the Regional Dance Championship, every single one was filled. The stage was enormous, 40 feet wide, polished black, lit from above by a grid of spotlights that turned the air into something you could almost touch. Television cameras lined the wings. A live stream feed ran on the Academy's website, and within 10 minutes, the viewer count passed 60,000. 12 finalists, 3 rounds, solo performances only. Megan Holloway drew the 9th slot. Grace Carter drew the 12th. Last. The first 8 performances were strong, technically polished, emotionally competent. The audience clapped. The judges made notes. The evening moved forward like a well-oiled clock. Then Megan took the stage. She was flawless. Her routine was pure classical ballet. 4 minutes choreographed by a coach her father had flown in from New York, set to Prokofiev, executed with the precision of a Swiss watch. Every releve landed on the beat. Every extension reached its full line. Every transition flowed without a single visible breath. The scores flashed. 9.4, 9.3, 9.5, 9.2, 9.4. Average, 9.36. Megan walked off stage smiling. In 3 years, no one had scored above 9.4. 3 more dancers performed. Good, not great. The live stream count climbed past 90,000. Then the lights went down. A single spotlight appeared at center stage. Finalist number 12, Grace Carter. Phones rose in the darkness like a field of small glowing flowers. Grace walked out from the wings. Simple, black leotard, no sequins, no jewelry, hair in a single braid. And on her feet, pale pink ballet shoes, satin darkened with age, ribbons yellowed but tied tight. Eleanor's shoes. Someone in the front row whispered, "That's the cowgirl." Grace took her position, center stage, arms at her sides, head down. 3 seconds of stillness, long enough for every whisper to die. The music began, a single violin playing the melody Eleanor had written 44 years ago. Slow, aching, the kind of music that sounds like someone remembering something they lost. Grace moved. She began with ballet, pure classical textbook, the kind Megan had just performed. But Grace didn't dance like she was executing choreography. She danced like she was telling a secret. Every arabesque was a sentence, every développé was a confession. Her body didn't perform the music. It translated it, the way a poet translates pain into language that makes strangers cry. The audience went still. 60 seconds in, the music shifted. The violin faded. A beat dropped. Low, heavy, urban. Grace's body changed with it. The ballet fractured. A fouetté broke mid-rotation into a freeze. Her arms snapped from port-de-bras into a pop-and-lock sequence so precise it looked like electricity running through water. She hit the floor, swept her legs in a full circle, and came back to standing in a single breath. 2,000 people gasped. Grace pushed deeper. Ballet and street dance fused, not alternating, not taking turns, but becoming something new. A grand jeté that landed in a power slide, a pirouette that dissolved into a wave rolling from her fingertips to her heels. 2 styles built in a garage with a cracked mirror by a grandmother who never got her stage and a granddaughter who refused to lose hers. The music climbed. The strings returned, layered over the beat, building toward something inevitable. Grace began to spin. Fouetté. 1, clean. 2, faster. 3, 4, 5. Each rotation tighter, her spotted arm whipping her body with a force that made the air hum. 6, 7, 8. The audience stopped breathing. 9, 10. Someone in the balcony stood. 11. The beat and strings hit their peak together. 12. Grace stopped, dead center, arms open, head back, perfectly still. 1 second of absolute silence. Then the theater broke. 2,000 people erupted. Not applause, eruption. People were on their feet before they knew they'd stood up. Strangers grabbed each other's arms. A woman in the third row cried into her hands. The live stream chat froze. Servers couldn't handle the traffic. In a hospital room 11 miles south, Eleanor Carter watched on a phone propped against a water pitcher, her right leg in a brace, her left hand gripping the bed rail. Tears ran down her face in 2 straight lines, and she didn't wipe them. She didn't need to. They were the right kind. Backstage, Megan stood in the wings, arms crossed, watching the ovation stretch past a full minute. Her face was blank. Not angry, not sad. The face of someone who just realized the thing she feared most wasn't losing. It was being ordinary. The judges conferred for less than 2 minutes. The scores flashed. 9.8, 9.9, 9.7, 9.8, 9.9. Average, 9.82. Ms. Vivian Cole removed her glasses, set them on the table, and looked at the stage where Grace had stood. Then she did something no one had seen her do in 10 years of judging. She smiled. The scoreboard told the truth, but the numbers were only part of the story, because what happened after the lights came back on was the part no one saw coming. Ms. Vivian Cole stood at the microphone and waited for the theater to fall silent. It took a while. 2,000 people were still on their feet, still clapping, still holding on to the arm of the stranger beside them because what they had just seen required something to hold on to. In my decade as head judge, Vivian said, I have watched hundreds of dancers on this stage. I have seen technical perfection. I have seen passion. I have seen discipline that bordered on artistry. She paused. Tonight, I saw something I have never seen before. She turned toward the wings. Grace stood just off stage, still in Eleanor's shoes, still breathing hard. Grace Carter, please come out here. Grace walked back onto the stage. The applause swelled, immediate, fierce, as if the audience had been waiting for permission to feel what they'd been holding in. Technical perfection can be taught, Vivian said. I've taught it myself. But what Grace did tonight cannot be taught. The fusion of 2 worlds, the refusal to choose between tradition and truth, that is something you either carry inside you or you don't. She looked at Grace. You carry it. The trophy was silver and heavy, shaped like a dancer in mid-leap. Vivian placed it in Grace's hands. Then she said the words that changed everything. On behalf of the Juilliard School of Dance, I am honored to award Grace Carter a full 4-year scholarship, effective this fall. The theater erupted for the 3rd time. Grace held the trophy against her chest, fingers pressing into cold metal, and for the first time since she'd walked into Prestige Dance Academy, she let the tears come. Not many, just enough. Richard Holloway had already left, slipping through a side exit during the standing ovation while the cameras pointed the other direction. The Academy's board would announce his removal 3 days later, citing conduct inconsistent with the institution's values. His name would come off the brass plaque by the end of the month. Megan found Grace in the dressing room. She stood in the doorway a long time before Grace noticed her. When Grace looked up, she expected anger, or excuses, or the same curled lip from the first day. Instead, she saw a girl who looked tired. Not competition tired, life tired. The kind of tired that comes from carrying a version of yourself that was never really yours. I was wrong, Megan said. About everything. Grace studied her face. Mascara smudged, bun come loose. For the first time, she looked like a person instead of a performance. You called me a cow, Grace said. Not with anger, just with fact. I know. You tried to have me thrown out. My father did that. You let him. Megan didn't argue. She took it. I don't know if I can forgive you, Grace said. Not tonight. Maybe not for a long time. But I hope you learn to dance for yourself, not against someone else. Megan nodded and walked down the hallway. The same hallway where she'd once told Grace the custodial office was downstairs. Eleanor came home from the hospital 4 days later. Grace was waiting on the porch with Tyrell and Sophie, the trophy on the kitchen table next to the coffee tin. Eleanor didn't look at the trophy first. She looked at Grace's feet. You're still wearing my shoes. I'm never taking them off. Eleanor laughed, the kind that starts deep and shakes loose something stuck for decades. She pulled Grace into a hug, one hand on the back of her granddaughter's head, and held on like she was afraid the whole thing would turn out to be a dream. That summer, Grace used the prize money to renovate the garage on Maple Avenue. Proper sprung hardwood over the plywood, a full wall of glass replacing the cracked mirror, a steel bar at regulation height. She kept the folding chair. She called it the Eleanor Carter Dance Program. Free classes every Saturday for any kid in Southside who wanted to learn. No auditions, no fees, no dress code. Show up and move. On the first day, 14 children came. By the second month, 32. They ranged from 5 to 16. Some had ballet shoes, most had sneakers. One showed up barefoot. Grace taught them the way Eleanor had taught her, with patience, precision, and the kind of repetition that turns awkward limbs into instruments. And when the ballet was done, she taught them the rest, the fusion, the language that belonged to them. Eleanor sat in the folding chair every Saturday, cane across her lap, counting beats, correcting arms. Sometimes she'd tap her cane twice. Tap, tap. And the whole room knew that whatever just happened was exactly right. On the wall above the mirror, Grace had framed something. Not the trophy, not the newspaper clippings. Eleanor's ballet shoes. Pale pink satin darkened with age. Ribbons, yellowed and soft. Inside the left shoe, written in blue ink faded almost to nothing, 8 words that had carried 2 women across 44 years. Dance like they'll never let you stop. Below the frame, on a small brass plate, Eleanor Carter, 1982. Grace Carter, 2026. Every Saturday, a new group of children looked up at those shoes and asked the same question. Whose are those? And every Saturday, Grace gave the same answer. They belong to every girl who was ever told she couldn't dance. If this story moved you, drop a comment. Tell me about the person who believed in you when no one else did. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't already, subscribe. Because every week we find stories like Grace's, and we make sure the world